If you can't tell a story without your hands flying everywhere and people tell you to calm down or stop being so dramatic, neuroscience has discovered something incredible. Your brain is actually processing language differently than most people, and that makes you more intelligent, not more dramatic. Let's talk about something you've probably been self-conscious about your entire life. You talk with your hands, not just occasionally, constantly. You can't tell a story without gesturing. You can't explain an idea without your hands painting pictures in the air. You can't have a phone conversation without gesturing to nobody. And people have opinions about this. They tell you to calm down, to stop being so dramatic, to keep your hands still. Some people even grab your hands mid-conversation to make you stop, but here's what they don't understand. You're not being dramatic or attention-seeking. Your brain is using a more sophisticated form of communication that integrates multiple neural systems, and science proves that people who gesture while speaking are actually demonstrating higher cognitive function. Research from the University of Chicago and countless neuroscience studies reveals something fascinating. Gesturing while speaking isn't a nervous habit or cultural quirk. It's cognitive processing made visible. When you gesture, you're not just adding decoration to your words, you're offloading cognitive work from your verbal system to your motor system, which frees up mental resources for more complex thinking. Essentially, your hands are helping your brain think. Studies show that people who gesture while explaining complex concepts understand those concepts more deeply than people who keep their hands still. Here's what's happening in your brain that doesn't happen in non-gesturers. When you speak and gesture simultaneously, you're activating multiple brain regions. Broca's area for speech production, the motor cortex for hand movement, the visual cortex for spatial thinking, and the parietal lobe for integrating all of this. You're essentially running parallel processing systems. While others are using one channel of communication, you're using 3 or 4. This isn't excessive, it's efficient. Your brain has discovered that combining verbal and visual spatial information creates richer, more accurate communication. Let's talk about what your hand gestures actually do. Neuroscientists categorize gestures into types: iconic gestures that represent physical objects or actions, metaphoric gestures that represent abstract concepts, deictic gestures that point to things, and beat gestures that emphasize rhythm and timing. When you talk with your hands, you're unconsciously choosing the appropriate gesture type to match your message. This requires sophisticated neural coordination between language centers and motor planning regions. You're not flailing randomly. You're executing precise movements that carry meaning. Research shows that gesturing improves memory and learning. Studies with students found that those who gestured while studying retained information better than those who didn't. Why? Because gesturing creates what's called embodied cognition. Your body is physically encoding information, not just your verbal memory system. When you gesture while explaining something, you're creating a motor memory alongside the verbal memory. This is why you often can't remember what you said without recreating the gesture. The gesture is part of the memory. Here's something that will validate everything you've felt. Research proves that people who gesture are perceived as more competent, confident, and persuasive when they're in the right context. The problem isn't the gesturing, it's that some cultures or situations value restraint over expressiveness. But in contexts where authentic communication is valued, your gesturing makes you more effective, not less. Studies of effective leaders, teachers, and public speakers show that strategic gesturing increases audience engagement, comprehension, and trust. Let's address the social judgment you face. People tell you you're too much, or too Italian, or too dramatic, or too animated. This reflects their discomfort with expressiveness, not a problem with your communication style. In many cultures, Mediterranean, Latin American, Middle Eastern, many African cultures, gesturing is normal and expected. In more reserved cultures, it's seen as excessive. But this is cultural preference, not objective truth. Your gesturing isn't wrong, it's just different from their norm. And increasingly, research shows that the gesturing style is actually more effective for complex communication. Here's what people don't see. You're not choosing to gesture, it's automatic. Trying to stop you from gesturing is like trying to stop you from thinking. Studies show that when people are forced to keep their hands still, their verbal fluency decreases. They use more filler words, pause more, and struggle to find the right words. Why? Because gesturing isn't decoration. It's part of your thinking process. When you suppress gesturing, you're literally suppressing part of your cognitive function. Research reveals that gesturing serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It helps you organize your thoughts, the spatial arrangement of your hands in the air mirrors the logical structure of your ideas. It helps your listener understand. Visual information supplements verbal information, creating redundancy that improves comprehension. It helps you regulate your speech. The rhythm of your gestures helps pace your speaking, and it helps you retrieve words, Creating a physical representation of a concept helps activate the verbal label for that concept. Let's talk about the types of people who gesture most. Research shows high correlation with several traits: extroversion, emotional expressiveness, spatial reasoning ability, and comfort with embodied communication. You're likely someone who thinks in images and spatial relationships, not just words. When you describe a spiral staircase, your hand traces a spiral. When you explain a timeline, your hand moves left to right. You're translating internal visual representations into external physical movements. This is sophisticated cognitive translation that happens automatically. Here's something profound. Children who gesture early develop better language skills. Babies who point and gesture before speaking develop larger vocabularies and more complex grammar. Throughout childhood, kids who gesture while learning acquire concepts faster. This continues into adulthood. People who gesture while learning new information retain it better and longer. Your gesturing isn't a childish habit you should have outgrown. It's an effective learning and communication strategy you've wisely maintained. Studies on cross-cultural communication show that gesturing serves as a universal bridge. When you're speaking in a second language, gesturing dramatically improves mutual understanding. When you're explaining something complex, gestures provide visual scaffolding that helps listeners follow along. When you're telling a story, gestures make it more vivid and memorable. Your hands are doing work that words alone cannot accomplish. Let's address the specific situations where your gesturing causes problems. In professional settings with cultural norms of restraint, your gesturing might be judged as unprofessional. In photos and videos, excessive gesturing can be distracting. During formal presentations with podiums, your hands might look trapped and awkward. These are real considerations. But the solution isn't to stop gesturing entirely. It's to modulate strategically. Save the big gestures for moments of emphasis. Use smaller, controlled gestures for professional contexts. But never eliminate gesturing completely, because that eliminates a crucial part of your communication effectiveness. Research on gesture and lying is particularly interesting. Studies show that when people lie, their gesture patterns change. They either gesture much less, cognitive load of lying suppresses natural gesturing, or they gesture in ways that don't match their words. Your natural abundant gesturing is actually a sign of authenticity. You're so engaged with what you're saying that your whole body is involved. People who talk with their hands are generally perceived as more honest and genuine because the gesturing reveals authentic cognitive engagement. Here's the neuroscience. Gesturing activates the same brain regions involved in action planning and tool use. Essentially, you're using your hands as tools for thinking. This is deeply human. Our evolutionary history shows that hand use and language development are intimately connected. Before humans had complex spoken language, we likely communicated heavily through gesture. Your gesturing isn't a regression, it's accessing a fundamental human capacity for embodied communication. The truth about talking with your hands is this: it's not a flaw, habit, or cultural accident. It's a cognitive strategy that makes you a more effective thinker and communicator. Your hands are helping your brain process language, spatial information, and abstract concepts simultaneously. You're not being dramatic, you're being thorough. You're not seeking attention, you're seeking clarity. And the people who tell you to stop are asking you to handicap your own cognitive processing to match their comfort level.